Peace be upon you, creative minds. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video with me. I am Nasira, an interior designer and a custom organizational solution designer. In today's video, we are going to talk about something very, very important. Now, when we talk about interior design, a lot of people think about creativity, flair, decor, and stuff like that. But there is a lot of science behind it. We're talking about so many elements that have to work together in order to create a harmony and a beautiful home. So today's video is going to be about the 7 elements of interior design. So the first element in interior design is actually space. So when we talk about space, we're talking about the 3-dimensional area. So we are talking about width, height, and length. So when we talk about space, sometimes we designers have the luxury to maybe knock out some walls or, change the layout of a space to make it look more beautiful and maybe function better. But if you don't really have the luxury to do so, you just have to work within that 3-dimensional space that you have. So you need to take care of the scale, you need to take care of how long a piece could be or how high. You're talking about so many elements that could fit in that space without having to overcome it or even to make it look so crowded or not filled at all. And when we talk about the element of space in interior design, we're also talking about positive space and negative space. What that means is that when you have a positive space, it means that you actually filled it with some maybe furniture, some decor elements, stuff like that. And the negative space means that it is left pretty much empty. Now, there should be a balance between these two, right? So you can't always fill your room with furniture and things, and at the same time, you don't really want to make it or leave it very, very empty. And when we talk about that, we need to keep in mind also the fact that it all depends on your style and the interior design style that you're looking for. For instance, if you are one person who is a minimalist, having less items in your house is probably the key to your design. Now, when that happens, you know for sure that you will have probably more negative space than you actually have positive space. The same thing goes around with if you have something like an eclectic style, which means that you have more stuff or more things to display in your home, and that means you have more positive space than negative space. Again, if you really want to play with that, you should have some kind of balance between these two, but again, it all depends on your style. Now, the second element in interior design is actually lines. And when we talk about lines in a home, we talk about 3 different kinds of lines. First one is horizontal. And when we talk about horizontal, we're looking at tables, for instance, and surfaces like countertops and stuff like that. These elements or these lines actually draw your eye and they make the space look like it's stable, right? It's formal. And it's efficient because you're gonna, probably have a lot on there and it's functional at the same time. Now, when we talk about lines, we also talk about vertical lines, and those could be seen through windows, doorways, and structural lines. When we look at those, it makes the space look a little bit taller. If you're having long windows, for instance, or tall windows, it makes the space look taller. And that is something that designers have to keep in mind whenever they are trying to create or make the space look even taller when we don't really have the space for it or the height for it. The third type of lines is the dynamic lines or the curved, zigzag, organic, whatever you want to call it. And those are actually a fun element to add. You could see that maybe with staircases and stuff like that, and those add a lot of fun into the space. Makes it look more organic, more dynamic, and not just a boring space. When you are an interior designer, when working with a space, you really need to take care of these lines. You want to have some kind of balance if that's really what you are looking for. Not just a long space or a horizontal line space. It just makes it seem a little bit boring, more functional than actually appealing to the eye. You want focal points, but at the same time, you can achieve that by having different elements and different lines to work for the same purpose. The third element of interior design is form. Form is the shape of a room, a shape of objects within that room, and it generally relates to the general or the physical form of an object or anything that is three-dimensional. When we talk about form, we are talking about two things, probably geometric and natural. When we talk about geometric, we're talking about something that sounds like it is man-made. It has hard lines, maybe square edges to it. Well, when we talk about natural, we're thinking about something that could be made or created by nature. It just has the organic looks and not so hard lines in it. When we are trying to create spaces and we want some unity and harmony, we need to keep in mind the word or the element of form. So here is an example. You are trying to focus on having square elements in your space, square objects, for instance. Now, when you try to do that, one thing you can do is probably repeat the same thing, the same shape or form in different sizes around the house. That makes the room or the house look like it is in harmony. But if you have different kinds of shapes working together, it just makes the eye look or the eyes a little bit more confused. Again, it all comes down to balance, harmony, unity, and stuff like that. So just choose one form probably that you really want to focus on and display that around the house to make it look more harmonious. Now, the fourth element of interior design is actually light, and that is one important element to keep in mind when designing a space. When we talk about light, we're talking about natural lighting, and we are also talking about man-made lighting. When we talk about lighting also, we're thinking about what are the purposes of lighting? What are we trying to highlight? Knowing that when you do all of this together, you're thinking about your form and you're talking about space as well. So you're trying to put the other elements back together and make them shine to their full potential. So with lighting, we are talking about maybe task lighting, accent lighting, decorative lighting, and ambient lighting. These four types of lighting actually are very important to keep in mind when designing a space. For instance, if you are designing an office and you know that you really need to have a lot of light so people can see what they are doing, then you really need to have a lot of lighting. And that could be by incorporating natural light and man-made lighting. So with natural light, it could be through maybe bringing in mirrors to reflect lighting. You could also do it by having lots and bigger windows, for instance, and also maybe wider doors, just so we can let the light in. And of course, you can do that through man-made lighting, and that is through maybe spotlights. You can have chandeliers for decorative lighting, just to add extra light. If you are trying to design a living room, for instance, that means something else. You want some atmosphere that seems very livable, right? Relatable. So you can have some cozy feeling when you are in that space. And you can do that by dimmed lighting. So you can, light it up all the way if you really need to, and you can dim it down and have some fun. Now, the fifth element of interior design is color. And when we talk about color, a lot of people think about paint, right? But it's not just paint. We're talking about paint, we're talking about textile, and the colors that we can bring in. But let's focus on the fact that when you're talking about color, you have to keep in mind three different things, knowing that color can stir emotions and bring back memories, so you need to play with that. When you're trying to choose a color, you have to think, as I said, of three different things. First thing is, what is the room going to be used for? What are the activities that are going to occur in that space, for instance? Now, when we talk about that, an example is, think of your office. All right, you have to do some work, maybe send emails, stuff like that. But if it is in your house and you don't really need it to be very bright, you can totally do a color that can be moody, for instance. The second thing you have to keep in mind when you're trying to design a room and have a play with color is that you need to know if that space is big or small. For instance, if your space is very, very small, the best bet is to have a lighter and brighter room. So you can maybe paint it white, you can paint it in lighter colors, and that will give the room the illusion that it is larger and bigger. The third thing you're gonna have to keep in mind is what are the moods, what are the emotions you want in this room, as I said in the first example. So if you want a room to be moody, something very eccentric, something different, then you can play with colors, but you have to keep in mind that you are thinking well and a lot about lighting. So that means that if you have a lot of natural light coming in, and then in addition to artificial light, you need to know how those elements are actually playing off your colors, because lighting definitely changes our perception of color. So whenever you're trying to design a room, think about the space. Is it small or big? Think about what is it used for, and think about how the light plays off of it and what is really your style that you're looking for. The sixth element of interior design is texture. And this means that we're talking about the feel to the touch of an object, for instance. The surface of an object has a tactile feeling to it. And that's what we're talking about. When we talk about texture also, we're talking about mixing. So as an interior designer, sometimes you mix colors and patterns together to make the room feel more interesting. It's the same thing, texture. So texture, what it does is it gives the room sense of depth, and mixing different kinds of patterns makes it more organic. When we talk about texture, we're talking about two kinds of texture actually, actual and visual. So the visual has to do with, of course, with your eyes. What do you see? Sometimes you come into a room and you see a pattern on the wall, maybe some trees, and it just looks like it is the actual tree that you can see, but it is not. All right, and then there is the actual texture. That's what you can touch maybe in your pillows or in your throws, the fabric that you have on your sofa. So textile can come in so many different kinds of forms and in every finish, right? So you can have glossy finishes and stuff like that. So, and that could be seen in furniture, fabrics, etc. So again, texture is very, very important, and the play with texture in any room again gives it a sense of depth, pattern. And it is a kind of similar when we talked about texture. So what it does, it gives a visual interest to the room. Now with patterns, we can talk about the repetitive forms that we can see, or shapes and patterns that we see in, for instance, rugs, wallpaper pattern. We are also talking about what kind of pattern is it? Is it geometrical? Is it natural? Is it pictorial? Etc. These elements in interior design can play a huge role. So when you're trying to have some kind of pattern in your home, try to think about the size of the room again. If the room is so small, but you have bigger patterns, for instance, it might overwhelm the space. However, if you have a bigger space and you want to play with different kinds of patterns, it is the best way to do that, or as let's call it a rule of thumb, is to just mix maybe maximum of 3 patterns. And when you're talking about pattern, you're talking also about style. So what is really your style? So for instance, if you're talking about a traditional design or traditional style, you're thinking more about maybe floral patterns, right? And if you're talking about contemporary, maybe it's more geometrical. So again, it's a play of your style and what you really, really want to do in that space. What is the style of the home? And then also, how big is your space? Once you do that, you have to also think about color, right? So you have to relate it to the color of your room, for instance, the texture that you have in there to play off, etc. And that was it for today's video. We have just talked about the 7 elements of interior design, which are space, line, form, light, pattern, texture, and color. I hope you have enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I really hope that you have learned something out of this. So just please refer to this video if you want to know more, and I will be leaving you in style for now. So